Perfect. All right, we'll get started. Hey, good morning, everybody, or I guess good afternoon. We're right in the middle there. Welcome to today's webinar. This is our second part 2 of our Shade Gardens class with Peg Beer. So we're excited to have her back today. I'm just going to get through some notes real quick for you all on how the webinars work in case you haven't joined us before. So we can't see or hear you on this class. So if you have any questions, what you'll be able to do is click on the Q&A button on your Zoom menu, type those questions in. And when Peg is able to take questions, we'll start taking some of those questions. We are recording today. A copy of the recording will go out to everybody by email tomorrow. So you can look for that. If you have to sign out for any reason, we'll be sending that out tomorrow. So don't worry about that. I think that about covers it. If you have any questions, please feel free to send them to me during the class. Quick introduction for those of you who are joining us for the first time. Peg has been with Maryfield for many years. She's joined our Gardening Advisor TV show. She's been teaching classes with us for a long time and draws from years of experience working in her own garden, which I believe is primarily what she's presenting on today. Beautiful garden. So looking forward to seeing more of that. So Peg, thank you so much. And I'm going to go ahead and let you get started.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to all of you. And what a good time to be in watching horticulture, because it's a little misty and quite cool outside right now. But after all, it is the 2nd of November. And yes, I am continuing to show you through parts of my garden. Why do I choose to do this? Because I have grown so many things and killed so many things over a period of 63 years in this garden. It is, I won't call it a wild garden, let's call it an informal family garden, because it was never put together as a showplace garden, but one in which we could just enjoy living and being. And it's good to be able to share all of that. As I was telling Sally and Kelly, who's here with me right now, with 1 or 2 of these slides could be an entire program, because you would want to go in depth with how it's planted and why it's planted that way, because I do go for a 4 seasons garden of interest. And I'm going to pick up where we left off last week, which was at the end of one pathway. And so Kelly, if we can bring up the first slide, I would tell you we are just turning the corner on these pathways, because it's a fairly large property, over 2 acres. And there are a lot of pathways in this garden, and a lot of them are really easy care, easy walk on, easy push the wheelbarrow on kind of thing. I put down landscape fabric and tacked it down with what we call sod pins so it would stay in place. And then on top of that, I put at least 1 inch, maybe more in some places, of this really fine gravel called Seminole chips. It's the 3/8 inch. It's small so that you can comfortably walk on it. It's not smooth, it's rough stone, so therefore you can push a wheelbarrow on it easily, and that's very important. I don't recommend the tiny stones like the pea gravel, because it's very round and smooth and you can slip on it, and it's very difficult to push a wheelbarrow through. And so we're really going to travel up this little gravel path. It is met there by another short pathway of different stones, and I like the combination. In reality, I garden with primarily shade, primarily dappled light through the day, because most of it is large oak trees. I do have sections that get at least 6 to 8 hours of sun. And so fortunately, I can also grow plants that require more sunshine. But in this program, we're talking about those that either grow well or tolerate, anyway, a fair amount of shade. So let's travel up this path and see some of the plants that are there. I'm presenting some of the things that people don't frequently use, but that I think are very interesting, and they can be used in small gardens. As a matter of fact, last week we dug a few of these plants and put them into the back section of one of my daughter's gardens because she needed some additional privacy and screening in that area. So let's do the next one, Kelly. Okay, traveling shortly down this path are some interesting textures, variations of height also, and color. You're looking in the foreground at a clumping bamboo, and then directly behind it, which is evergreen, by the way, and it's not invasive, absolutely not. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And then there's the boxwood, which is one of the upright varieties like D. Runk or fastigiata upright forms, which is a nice change from, also it gives you the deeper green with the little broader leaf, which is a good contrast. And back in the background, and we'll see it closer in the next picture, is Abelia. We have, again, a repeat. I love to repeat because it gives you a continuity that feels comfortable when you do that. And so this is another clumping bamboo, and it's probably 7 feet tall, could be a little taller than that, but I have enjoyed this so much. This one has been in for several years, and the clump is pretty good size. And in front of that is another grassy looking plant, which I use a lot of in my garden as a border kind of thing. And it's a golden variegation, and it's called Hydrangea. Hydrangea. I didn't do an outline today, so if you're interested in some of these plants, please try to write it down. Hydrangea is the grassy looking thing in front of the bamboo. And then there is in front of that Abelia. Abelia is a plant that will bloom off and on throughout the entire summer. And there are some very interesting color formations in this, different types. This one happens to have a lot of yellow in it. And in the next picture is a little bit better view of that as we were looking down the path. Now we're looking up that same path, and we are seeing the Abelia, which is growing beneath the big oak trees, and also Crepe Myrtle that's in that area. Down as more of a ground cover is a fern that I absolutely enjoy, and it's evergreen, and that's the sword fern. And you can see in the distance, again, the boxwood, okay? So let's look at a close-up now. This is that Abelia that I was telling you about, and it's beautiful. Bringing it in to use in flower arrangements, it holds up really quite well. And after the flowers are finished, I don't know if you'd call it seeds, but the little pods that are formed after that are really very interesting and quite pretty in flower arrangements. So nestled in next to one of those bamboos is a favorite spot in my garden, and that is this wonderful little pond that is so easy to maintain. Now, I do protect this over winter. Frequently, I will cover it, empty out the fountain and cover it, but everything is contained within that little fountain with the water and so forth. And all you have to do maintenance wise is to just be sure you don't let too much of the water evaporate, and one can sit on the edges of that stone and enjoy it. I love the sound, particularly in this somewhat forested area with all of the birds. It's a very pleasant place to be. And to one side of that is a perennial called Plumenaria, which is also evergreen. Now, I wasn't, gardens change. And There is maintenance. There is no garden without maintenance. And there are areas that you might sometimes want to come in and redo. And that happens to me. And that is exactly what has happened a few weeks ago when I decided that the little area near this mountain was not attractive. And so I got into that. I have good soil because I've gardened for all these years and I've used the composted leaves or the leaf growth and other beneficial additives added to the top of my soil so that the earthworms carry it down naturally. The only time I really disturb the soil is when I'm planting, and I was planting a good bit in this area. And as I planted, I was working into that soil a couple of new things that I will show you in a few moments. But I decided I wanted something that was going to be more attractive. And so I put in the little grassy plant called Ophiopogon, which is a dark, almost black looking sort of plant near the front. And then I had so many babies of the Pulmonaria, which blooms in the spring beautifully as evergreen. And I distributed those somewhat through the center. I wanted something definitely evergreen in here. And so I included the Christmas fern, which is a beautiful fern to use in part shade. And behind that, which is not visible in this picture, I did a layout of the sweet box, which is a 2.5 foot little evergreen. And now I will have something that's really interesting there. If you decide to sit down on that fountain and enjoy life for a few minutes, okay, getting away from the bustle and hustle of the everyday lives that we all have a tendency to live. I find that the garden is the greatest respite from all of that. It's wonderful. So I'm going to share now just a few plants that you may not have used. And these don't have to be in a wild garden by any stretch. They can be used within even a smaller garden. The next one is relatively new to me in planting, and it's called Telecampus. I'm going to make a stab at spelling this, Calycanthus, Telecampus. And the variety here is Aphrodite. I have a really old-fashioned one given to me by a neighbor many, many years ago that is very fragrant, but not the beautiful flower of this. This flower is magnificent. Now, I am going to protect that flower from that plant from the deer rubbing because they love to deer rub at this time of the year, and they did destroy it one year, and I was very disappointed. So this is a great shrub. It is growing about 4.5 feet, 5 feet tall and as wide, and has been in now for maybe 5 or 6 years. And then the next one is an underused small tree. This is a beautiful, beautiful, beautifully shaped tree, but also as it ages has lovely bark. And it's called Franklinia, Franklinia, Franklinia. One of the beauties of this, it almost looked like a camellia. One of the beauties of this is that it blooms a little later than most of the spring flowering small trees. I love it. I've always wanted to be able to grow Stewardia, which happened to have been found many, many years ago on one of the rivers near where I was brought up in southern Georgia, and never found since then. So all of those Stewardia, all of the Franklinia came from those plants in South Georgia. And this is a close, I won't say relative, but look-alike for sure. It's Stewardia, okay, Stewardia. And in the next picture, one of my absolute favorite plants, as I mentioned to you previously, and we have such a good collection of them outside. It's a beautiful plant, Camellia. A beautiful plant, and we have a lot of them now that are quite hardy in this area. I personally prefer to grow them where they do not get the hottest sun and also where they don't get the strongest winds, particularly the winter winds. They have grown quite well for me, and I'm particularly fond of the sasanquas. And I'll take a moment to, if you come back to me for just a moment, Kelly. I did go out and pick just a few of the little camellias. Now, is this showing on there? The little camellias that we have now. A lot of people do choose to buy them while they're in bloom, which is good. You know what you're going to get. And when you do, give them a little additional protection this first season going into the ground. Put a couple of inches of mulch on top of the root ball to help them a little bit to get through, and they should be fine. But I love it. And I need to share with you something too. I have been fortunate in my long life in this industry to have met many, many of the leading horticulturists in the field. One of those was Alan Armitage, Armitage. He was a gentleman that was actually born in Canada and spent most of his life as a professor down at the University of Georgia. And I have met him on many occasions. He has written many books. I highly recommend all of his books. And fortunately, I have, I think, most of them which he has signed. And I just picked up a couple of the ones because he has a tremendous sense of humor. I picked up a couple of those that I have. One is called Legends in the Garden. Do you ever wonder why a plant was named a certain name? And I particularly thought of this because of the camellias. I grew up in the Deep South, near a little town called Quitman, Georgia, and actually between two towns because I was a farmer's daughter. And my mother was quite a horticulturist herself, and she grew beautiful, beautiful plants. She loved particularly camellias. And when I was chatting with him, and he actually gave me this book, he said, "Oh, I have written about one of your mother's friends in here." And I was delighted to read that. Her name was Betty Sheffield. Now, our camellias in this area are very different than some of those in the Deep South. A lot of those in the Deep South are not really hardy in this area. So I, unfortunately, cannot grow this camellia here. But he wrote a wonderful, wonderful article and actually visited the little town of Quitman, Georgia. And the interesting thing, and the reason that I picked this, was that she found a mutation on one of her camellias, and she took it to the gentleman who ran York's nursery at the time to propagate it for her. And it was so beautiful, they named it Betty Sheffield, which was her name. And then from that plant came another beautiful plant, and they named it Betty Sheffield Supreme. And that plant was chosen while Jimmy Carter was president, and it was presented by Rosalind Carter in South Georgia as the first there were 4 of the first flowers on a US stamp, which I was pretty impressed by all of that. So this is a fun book. If you want to look it up sometimes, it's Legends in the Garden. This lady happened to have been a good friend of my mother, and that made it very, very special to me. Another fun one, if you were looking at Alan Armitage and his books, is Of Naked Ladies and Forget-Me-Nots. And it's the stories behind a lot of the common names of our favorite plants. So I'll share some of that. Oh, well, maybe I'll share it now. There's one in here, for instance, because I'm going to mention, or did in the last one actually, the Impatiens, the bedding Impatiens that we now have free of problems with the various things that happen to them. So now we can grow these successfully again. And it's called Touch Me Not, primarily because when you touch the seeds, they just go flying everywhere. And that's, everything has a way to repropagate itself. And sometimes that's the way it is. Let's continue with some of the plants that are a little more unusual and aren't grown nearly as much. I'm sorry that you really can't see the blossoms on this particular one, but I love people very much. But when I go home, I also like some privacy within the garden, and I think most people do. And so knowing that I was going to have a lot of building around the community, I protected the borders, but I did it differently. Not with a line of one thing, but with a mass of different things, very diverse things. A lot of large flowering trees, dogwood, redbud. This particular one is Hydrangea, or silver bells, crepe myrtle, and then underplanted with rhododendron and other various evergreen plants, so that it gives me a beautiful, diverse area, and the birds, bees, butterflies all love it. So regardless of how large or small your garden is, research some of these plants that can give you privacy. With the trees that lose their leaves, they give you that privacy primarily when you're outside. And it's a quick way to get height from things. And so this Hydrangea silver bell is a part of the diversity of one of those lines of privacy there. In the next picture, there are so many things to enjoy about the garden. And sunrise, sunset, the shadows, the action of the wind on the plants, particularly the grasses that are there. But this was early morning, sunrise coming up through diversity. Yes, I have lawn, if you can call it lawn. I am not big on chemicals, and so I have a fair amount of clover, a little bit more creeping Charlie than I'd like right now, but it is my lawn, and that is the play space, because everybody has games that they like to play. And so I do want some lawn in my garden, but I have many beds, many different beds with pathways between that you can walk through and enjoy. And this is coming through primarily the oak wood area, which is all dappled light, and I can grow almost anything there except those things that require a lot of sunshine. And what you're looking at with the sun almost coming through is another tree that's underplanted. Now this one is quite large, but it's quite old also. It's probably 40 years old, and it's sweet Bay Magnolia. If you have an area that's slightly moist or more moist than you would like all the time, this is the prime plant because it loves moisture. It can be kept smaller. This is quite tall. It's been limbed up. It can be kept smaller by pruning. I was just looking at some down in the tree section yesterday, and there are some beautiful ones there. One of the beauties that I think is special is the fragrance that comes from the blossoms that appear in the late spring, and actually can reboom slightly after that. And so that's another underused plant. And in the next picture, this is one actually that I would like very much to, at some point in the game, discuss the seasons in this garden because it's in my front garden. It certainly isn't a formal garden, but it's much closer than the other areas because it's not quite so wild and woolly as the rest of the place is. And this has boxwood, it has Japanese maple. In the background, there's a couple of 2 or 3 varieties of crepe myrtle. There is fringe tree, dogwood, a large beyond the driveway, and a part of that hedge that I showed you, the silver bell or Helicia. There is quite a few flowering trees there, more crepe myrtle, more magnolia. But there's something going on here of interest at all times of the year. In the foreground, there's a little white flower that is fantastic. I really do enjoy this because it blooms all summer long. And I don't have to deadhead. And you know, I had to laugh because Calamaris. This is, for some reason or other, I always tend to blank out on that name, Calamaris. I recommend it highly. It probably is about 2.5 feet tall, but there is a plant that will grow in full sun or in part shade, and it's very rewarding. So that's bordered by that liriope. Has, in the next picture, you'll see several varieties of hydrangea. This is another one that I totally enjoy. And there are, as you see in the next picture, more hydrangea, different varieties, a closer view of some of the crepe myrtle that are coming into bloom. Now, transferring to still another area is largely planted with a border of these azaleas. This is a protected area. We all have microclimates in our own garden, and I certainly do. And fortunately, here I have growing some azaleas that are more southern than normally grow here. And I really do enjoy. There's a path between these that you can't really see at the moment. I have a lot of hosta, I have a lot of fern. And in the next picture, I think it shows you a little bit more. Again, it may seem a little wild here, but I have sassafras. I don't know how many of you know that plant, but it's a small tree. And tea. When I was a little girl, we used to make sassafras tea, and it was so delicious. And today we're told, oh, don't do that. It's a carcinogen. So I haven't been drinking any sassafras tea, but I do enjoy the sassafras tree. It is often called the mittens tree because it is the only tree that I'm aware of that has 3 different shapes of leaves on it. It's very interesting. Beneath that and the native mountain laurel, I have many things growing. Largely, it was started as a place for all those small bulbs. I totally enjoy the early bloomers, and they're almost carpenters, the scilla, the species tulips, the small daffodils, is just covered with that. And then when they've gone from bloom, up pops the Solomon seal, which is fun, and the various ferns and some of the curates. But in the next picture, I highly recommend, now is a great time to plant your bulbs. This one is a species tulip called Clausiana. And the Clausiana will seed itself about, quite unlike more of our hybrid tulips that we have to enjoy for a year or 2 and then plant fresh. But these will continue, and I love them very much. And Kelly, could we play that video now? Because this is the time of year to get out there and plant those bulbs. And we've had some moisture in the ground right now. And so I think I'm talking over in this. We did this the other day. So this is a video, right? Okay.
I love to plant a garden that is beautiful in all 4 seasons. And bulbs are actually a wonderful part of that 4 seasons garden. I have the beginning in December with the little galanthus, and then you can follow with the beautiful crocus and the scilla and what we used to call the minor bulbs, which are not minor at all. And then you've got the wonderful big alliums that bloom usually in April and May. So you've got a lot going on in this corner, and then you turn and you're looking at beautiful tulips. I have to have tulips. At least fresh tulips every year planted in my containers. And there's wonderful choices. And you can have an extended period of bloom with those choices. And then you have the hyacinths. And they're so fragrant. And I love that fragrance. And they last for quite a while. And then you have the daffodils. Nothing bothers the daffodils. They just keep getting better all the time. The deer don't even eat them. Do I have a favorite? Absolutely. They are the miniature daffodils, a long line of them here that bloom over a period of time. And the foliage is small, so it doesn't annoy you when it's maturing to produce next year's bulb. And you can have these beautiful daffodils in bloom for a long period of time. And they're beautiful, beautiful colors. And a lot of them are fragrant. Actually, just yesterday, I was planting up my containers, changing them over from the season of summer into fall and winter. And I'd love to plant a lot of these beautiful yellow tulips. And so I put a number of them in the center of a large container. And then I decided to do a few of them a little differently, okay? So I took the Ophiopogon, the dark one, dumped it out of its pot, opened it up, and mass planted it on top of those tulips. So I'm going to have these beautiful yellow tulips coming up out of this black mondo grass. And I think that that's going to be really neat. So it's time to get these things into the ground if you're going to have all that beauty next spring. And try a little of each of them. Extend the season.
Oh, Kelly, I think that Bren did a great job with that one. I hadn't actually previewed it, so anyway, I do believe in these bulbs, and there's great longevity to all of them except some of the hybrid tulips, and usually they'll go for a couple of years, and then you have to replace them. But as I said, in these containers, and I have more than I should. I do plant various tulip bulbs, which I plant, I think I showed you last week, near the bottom, and then plant other plants on top of them. And I was trying this just for fun because I trial so many things. I was trialing some of these smaller grasses so that the bulbs would rise up out of them. So let's continue a little bit with some of our chatting for today. And I mentioned to you Solomon's seal, Polygonal. This is an absolutely beautiful, beautiful plant. It grows varying heights really, but mine primarily because it's in good soil, grows like 2 to 2.5 feet tall, arches over, has little tiny white flowers in the spring, but that really isn't why it's grown. It's grown more for its foliage and the contrasts of texture and color that you see in the garden. This is actually planted as part of that bed that I just showed you, where I have so many of those bulbs. And there'll be a continuity of color in the spring from those bulbs, because each of the various scilla and Thurinbergia, some of the names of some of those small bulbs, don't all bloom at the same time. And so there's always some color coming on from these various things. And it's complemented because they're growing among all of these perennials. This one dies back to the ground, and so it emerges after some of those bulbs have finished. And its common name is Solomon's seal. It's wonderful, and it's planted near an aucuba, which is variegated. And actually in the next picture, you will see a tiny bit of that, because you're also seeing to the right, my right side of the screen, the aucuba, which loves shade, part shade, with some dwarf Pyrrhus japonica, a dwarf hemlock, and an understory of the carex, the variegated carex, and hosta. So you see there's a lot going on in this space. Now, this is something that even in a small garden, if you have shade, you can have these kinds of plants within that area. You just look carefully at the sizes of them and ask yourself, how big do I want this plant to be? Fortunately, aucuba is very easy to prune, to keep smaller, but that particular one is at least 6 to 7 feet tall, but you can keep it smaller than that. Okay, let's talk about what's going on in that same area right now. So I have a lot of oak trees, which I love. Unfortunately, I have within the last few years lost a good number of those oak trees. A lot of people have, and we haven't totally pinpointed why. I think moisture, either too much or too little, has had something to do with it, but we don't seem to know exactly what's going on. But anyway, there are still beautiful, beautiful oak there. And every now and then, not every year, the acorns come down in profusion. And I have a feeling that you have this going on too if you've got oak trees. I have a shed there with a tin roof, and it sounds a little bit like a war. Now, I think that war is about over. And so knowing that almost all these acorns are going to try to sprout, and they're growing among my little grasses and my ferns and all of that stuff, I knew that this was one thing that a stitch in time saves time was very appropriate. Because if I didn't get them out of there now, before they sprout down, next spring would not be fun. And so I decided, okay, it's just time for a general cleanup. And I went in and clipped back a lot of the fern, except the Christmas fern, which is evergreen. A lot of the other ferns growing in this area are deciduous. They die back to the ground. And so I went ahead and cut all of those back. I cut back all of the hosta. I cut back a lot of the things so that I could get to that bare ground and get those acorns up. And would you believe, I'm trying to think how big this area is, that entire section that's near that particular oak tree that was quite prolific. And by the way, if you want to call something invasive, I'm ready to call those acorns invasive right now, because every one of them tries to sprout. And when they sprout and they send that first little shoot down, it's several inches deep. I had some sprouting already, and they're already a little difficult to get out of the ground. So you can understand why I wanted to get them up before next spring, because it would be an even bigger job. So from this area that's probably 100 by 100 feet, maybe. I got 5 large wheelbarrows full of acorns. Not funny. Okay, so after I did that, I decided, because I do compost all of my leaves and I use all of my compost in the garden, and it keeps that soil really good because I don't turn it. I just put it among the plants, and then I leave as much of the leaves as possible when they drift down, which they are doing already. But I decided I wanted to add some additional organic matter. And I want to show you that I've tried this, and this is what I normally do. We sell a product called Leaf Growth. It's all organic, and it's recycling too, which is fantastic. We sell this by the bag, and we sell it in bulk. I use all of my composted leaves, but it's never enough. And so when I need to purchase, this is the soil conditioner of choice. I love the composted, organic, recycled leaves. Now, there's 2 products that we've carried for a long, long time, but for whatever reason, I've never used them. Okay, so I've used these. I think I'm going to be impressed with them, and I will let you know in the future. This one is the one we market as composted soil conditioner. So it's a combination of things, and it's titled Merrifield's Topsoil. Now, it is not topsoil like you go out and scrape up the topsoil in your yard, which also has weeds in it. This does not. But this is actually a good soil that works into the same framework that the leaf grow does. Now, here is another one that I think I'm going to be highly impressed with. And I was speaking briefly to the salesperson yesterday about it. Coast of Maine, we carry a number of their products, and I've been impressed with the products that I have used. I have not used this one before. It's totally organic also, and it's used, he explained to me, where they are growing, and this is a lot in Pennsylvania, where they grow a lot of mushrooms. The straw and the peat moss and all of the things that are used to grow those mushrooms, when it's finished, they can't reuse it. They have to start over again. And so that's all composted and goes into bags. So it should be really good stuff. I will let you know. So I cautiously put an inch or 2 among those plants, and I did not turn it in. All right, I'll touch very briefly on the next one. Yes, I have deer. This is the season that they rub plants. If you have deer, and if you have plants that are susceptible for these bucks to mark their territory, or maybe get the fuzz off their antlers, whatever, I think it's marking territory myself, go out and protect them with a wire cage, or I love to use the tomato cages that are 2-piece that Bob Warhurst came up with several years ago. But get out there and protect those plants, because they will rub them. And if you come back to me, and we will have time for just 2 or 3 questions, but first I want to tell you that I use Bobex, by the way, for eating, but that does not take care of rubbing. Behind me are several shrubs. We did not talk about anything that even begins to look formal, but we do have some, and some that are wonderfully interesting, and some that most of which the deer don't eat, okay, which are just great for formal things, but we really don't have time to. A brand new one I've never grown. It's a type of honeysuckle, low growing, spreading. This would be maybe on the corner of a house where you want to give it room because it's low growing, but it spreads. And the next to that is one of those upright boxwood, which is a perfect plant also for a corner of a house. that won't eat it like some of these hollies that were planted years ago and now are growing above the roof line, you know. So being careful, the different spruces. This is one that is the false yew. Cephalataxis is the proper name. There's upright and there's spreading. Makes great for a more formal look at your foundation, or even in the informality of my own garden. But the deer don't eat this either. And nothing ever beats the Hanoki cypress. And they come in different sizes, from quite diminutive up until, you know, almost small trees. So there are beautiful things out there. And in another day and another time, we'll talk about some of those. But I think we have just a few minutes for some questions.
Thanks, Peg. Thank you so much. Yes, we have questions. So just a reminder to everybody, if we're not able to get to your questions today and you want to follow up after class, please feel free to hit reply on your confirmation email, send us a question. I'll share it with Peg and the team. So we're not always, of course, able to get to everybody's questions, but we'll get through as many as we can. Peg, the first question for you, this person is dealing with dry shade and they want to know if you have any recommendations for plants for dry shade.
Yes, and of course, when you say dry shade, you have to help these plants get going. They've got to get their feet in the ground and their roots out before they can tolerate that dry shade. And the other thing you need to ask is, what is the dry shade coming from? If it's coming from the surface roots of maple, the large maple, not Japanese maple, the large maple, that's one. Actually, birch is notoriously surface rooted. Beech, notoriously surface rooted. That sweet Bay Magnolia is also. That's a different kind of dry shade because you are now facing also severe competition with the root system. In others, in areas, and I have them beneath even my oak trees, which is easy enough to grow things beneath, I have the ground cover epimedium, which is evergreen, except it gets pretty awful looking in late March, early March. I cut it back. Makes a beautiful ground cover and does quite well once it is established. So that is a very good one for dry shade. Some, of course, liriope will be a great thing too. It'll grow in wet, dry. I think it'll grow anywhere, you know. So that is a very good one also. There are a few of the native plants. In fact, I had picked up the Northern Virginia Nova Natives publishes a wonderful little booklet here. And I was thumbing through some of this because fortunately I have truly native to my place many natives, and I'm loving it. But there are recommendations in here even of some of the native plants. I have high bush and low bush blueberry that have adapted to that area. As I said, you need to get them settled in first, you know. Chokeberry is another one that's native that does well there. My sassafras grows well there. We're talking small trees in this area, okay? Those are the ones that first come to mind. Some of the ferns will tolerate some dry shade. As a matter of fact, that evergreen Christmas fern, once it's established, will tolerate all of this. I'm thumbing through this to try to jog my memory a little bit, okay? But anyway, there are a number of the native plants. I am not a person who grows just natives. I can't do that. I love my plants too much for that. But I certainly do appreciate the natives and appreciate what they do for us, and I have them, as I said, that I didn't even have to plant. All I had to do was take care of them, okay? Landscaping and dry shade. Yeah, they do have that. Well, it lists dogwood. Yeah, I have some dogwood growing. It doesn't want dry. And a lot of them will not tolerate that maple root system, okay? So if you're talking about that, and it's an area where you can do it and make a nice, beautiful sitting area and grow things in containers, okay? I'm going to leave that topic right now.
Thank you, Peg. We've had a few people ask, you showed a couple pictures of the clumping bamboo. We had a few people ask if you know the cultivar name of that particular bamboo, if they're looking for the non-invasive type. I know that's tough because people don't want to don't accidentally plant the invasive one.
No, and you would never accidentally plant invasive if you buy clumping bamboo. And we sell a couple of varieties of it back there. It is of the variety Fargesii, but there's a new, I can't think of the exact cultivar right at the moment, but this is absolutely a clumper. It does not run. Its clump gets bigger, and I have just been delighted with it. Now it likes not wet soil, but slightly moist soil. It's not one of those that would grow well in a super dry condition, but I'm loving it. I think it's beautiful. Clumping bamboo. That's what you need to remember when you come into the nursery and say, I want my clumper.
Yes, definitely. All right. Thank you so much. Okay. The next question is about liriopes. This person says, I've noticed a lot of liriopes and I'm wondering if you cut them all back in the spring.
The only thing I have to do for liriope is run the lawnmower at 3-inch height over it before the new growth begins. So that means usually, depending upon the weather, second, third week of March. Run the lawnmower over it. If you can't do that, and you've got a string trimmer, do that, okay? Otherwise, it's down on your knees and clip, 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 because it looks kind of ratty at that point in the game. And then comes the fresh, and it's beautiful. I love liriope. Now, please, when I say that, do not buy liriope spicata. It is a runner. The other is a clumper. Big difference, okay? Yep.
I didn't know that there was a running liriopes. So that's good to know. Okay, so, the next question is about hellebores. What are your thoughts on using them in a shade garden?
I think I have about 1/3 of an acre at least of just hellebores.
That's what I thought. I knew you had a lot of them, but I wasn't sure how many. So I figured you would say yes. That's good.
Many years ago. And I think I've never met a Hellebores I didn't like. Now, the older varieties pretty much all sort of hang down, and you've got to lift them up to totally appreciate the blooms. Many different colors. They are very promiscuous. And so I have these baby seedlings all over, and I literally, they're ground covers in several areas. I absolutely love them. I have certainly acquired some of the newer varieties, and they're magnificent. Some of them lift their heads up and you can see them more readily, but I don't want to be without my Hellebores. No, and they'll tolerate a lot of shade.
Okay.
Now they'll bloom better if they get a little sunshine, okay?
All right, we have a few questions about mulch and different materials that can be used. The first question is, how do you prevent the weeds? Which I know you use a lot of mulch for that in ground covers. So I was wondering if you have anything to address for that.
Yeah, it's good exercise. Fortunately, in shade gardens, weeds are not as big an issue. Plus, I use ground covers extensively. And Sally, I think that's another one that bears some repetition coming up in our next winter seminars, is the use of some of these ground covers, because they can be absolutely beautiful and you don't have as many weeds. Okay, you will have some weed seeds blow in. I just removed some that are not actually weeds, but they're plants in places that I don't want them to be. And so they had to come out because I do a lot of seeding and I depend a lot on seeding. But sometimes you just have to rogue them out. I do use mulch. Primarily, my mulch is my compost. I compost all of my leaves, and I showed you the products. Excuse me, I'm disappearing for a moment because I threw these down, and I think I threw the leaf growth. Yeah, Kelly. Oh, that's so much better. Thank you, Kelly. In addition to whatever mulch you might want to put on top, this is my go-to product when I don't have enough, and that's leaf growth. It's composted leaves, it's organic, it's recycled. You can't beat that. So if you put that down, if you weed everything well, and you put that down a couple of inches, it's fantastic. Then if you don't like that look in areas, then you can put regular mulch. If it is not on the slope, I use the Virginia Fines because I like the look of it and I like the way it functions. But an awful lot of people use this threaded hardwood. So those are primarily the things, the use of ground covers around my plants. I want my other plants, but they're beautiful when these ground covers are surrounding them. Then mulch in the bare spaces and weed when you have to.
Yeah, thank you so much. And for anyone who's interested who did not see it, Peg did a class on ground covers recently. So we have that available on our YouTube channel. Peg, next question is continuing the mulch question. We had a couple people asking if you can use either pine needles or straw as mulch.
Absolutely. I love pine needles because that's a nostalgic thing for me. We had all of the southern pines, even the longleaf pine, and we used the pine needles extensively in my mother's garden, and now I use it to some degree in my own. A lot of times I will put down an inch of the Virginia Fines, and then just for aesthetic reasons, put the pine needles on top of that. Now, as far as straw is concerned, be absolutely sure that you never use hay because that has seeds in it. Yes, you could use that as a mulch, but I don't find that aesthetically pleasing. Okay, I use it in my compost, and we certainly don't need to go in how I compost, but that's another good one too. And while I'm doing that, I'll try to get some good pictures for another time. But I will be doing that compost pile coming up soon when the leaves begin to fall. And actually, the pine straw helps to aerate those leaves because I let them compost naturally. I do not have the time nor the energy to turn that pile frequently to have it rot down. So it has to do it on its own. But using that straw there, or possibly using it in a vegetable garden, but I would not find it aesthetically pleasing to use in the regular garden. Okay.
Thanks, Peg. All right, I think we've just got time for one more question. We've had a few people asking, where can we get the book on the native plants for Virginia, the one you showed, and then the names of the other two books that you showed? So
if you go online and look up Allan, Allan, Armitage, Armitage, he has a host of books. He's an expert on vines, on perennials, on native plants, you name it, okay? You would simply go online to some of these. We have some of his books here if you want to come and peruse some of those, but we don't have every one of them. So that is fantastic. And you know, I'm sure that if you went again online and looked up Plant Nova Natives, N-O-V-A, Plant Nova Natives. This was published in 2015, but I think they probably still have it. And we may have some copies of it downstairs. It's very good because it lists not just grasses, sedges, perennials, small shrubs, trees. It's really very, very informative. And as I said, I'm all for natives. I have many of them, but don't want to be restricted to just natives, okay?
All right. Yeah. Thank you so much, Peg. Okay. It is 1 o'clock. So I want to give you a chance before we close, if you have anything you'd like to conclude with. Just a quick reminder to everybody, I will be sending out the recording tomorrow, as well as the list of plants that I was sending out during the chat today. So Peg, if you have anything you'd like to share.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for offering me that. It's going to be cold tonight. I don't know that we're going to get a frost, but we never really know that. But it's going to be low 30s, I understand. Thank goodness, because I love to overwinter a lot of things. And there's another program, okay? But I have already brought a number of things that I want to overwinter into the house. And I will go home and bring in a couple more this afternoon, because we could possibly get a frost, and it's supposed to be cool all week. So it's a good time to do it anyway. Just wanted to give you that heads up that it's going to get cold now. It's November.
All right. Thank you so much, Peg. Appreciate the warning for sure. Everybody, just a quick reminder that email will be going out tomorrow. Keep an eye out for that, for the recording and the handouts. If you have any questions, please feel free to hit reply on your email with the login details. Send it our way, and we'll get back with you. Everybody, have a great day. Peg, thank you so much for teaching this class.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. All right. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
You too.